Today, we travel back to the dusty throne rooms of Israel, to a time when a queen rose up against the prophets of God, and learned that no throne, no kingdom, and no crown can stand forever. She wasn't born in Israel. She came from a land of idols and incense, where the blood of innocents soaked the altars of foreign gods. She didn't just marry a king. She seized a throne. Her name struck fear into the hearts of men. Her voice silenced prophets. And her influence brought a kingdom to its knees. She ruled not just with beauty and power, but with cunning, cruelty, and a defiance so bold, even heaven took notice. She painted her face and plotted death. She hunted the chosen of God like prey in the dark. They called her queen, but the heavens called her something else. And her end was as shocking as her rise. She was a queen feared by prophets, a ruler who silenced voices with fire and blood, and a name that echoed through history as a warning. Before there was a Jezebel, there was peace. After her reign, nothing was the same. This is not just the tale of a wicked queen. This is the story of power corrupted, of idolatry, vengeance, and divine justice. This is the tale of Jezebel, queen of Israel, worshipper of Baal, and the woman who challenged the prophets of God, and lost. Hello my wonderful people, welcome to Tell My Tales, where the stories of the Bible come to life. Today, we uncover the chilling rise and fall of one of the most infamous queens in history, Jezebel. A woman of power, influence, and ruthless ambition, she brought corruption to Israel and led many away from God. But in the end, justice prevailed. Stay tuned as we dive deep into her story and the powerful lessons it holds for us today, and without further ado, let's dive into the story of Jezebel and how she became the most ruthless queen of Israel. Long before she ruled in Israel, before her name became synonymous with wickedness, Jezebel was born into royalty, into a world shaped by gods of stone and fire. She drew her first breath in the mighty port city of Sidon, the pride of Phoenicia. Her father was King Ethbaal, a high priest turned monarch, a man who spilled blood for the throne. During the reign of King Ethbaal, Sidon was a kingdom bathed in incense and blood. Baal's altars blazed day and night. Temple prostitutes danced to drums, and children were burned beneath towering statues of bronze. Ethbaal ruled with an iron scepter in one hand, and a priest's staff in the other. He was the most pagan king Sidon had ever known, a man who not only bowed to false gods but led others to do the same. He declared Baal Melkart the god of thunder and victory. And under his rule, the worship of the one true God was banned, mocked, and hunted. But God is never without a witness. In the hills above the city, in the caves where doves nested and water ran like silver, there lived a man named Hananiel, a shepherd by birth, a prophet by calling. Hananiel had no scrolls, no sword, only a voice and a burden from the Lord. He had seen a vision, a mighty tree growing in Sidon, strong and tall, its branches reaching the heavens. But beneath its roots, fire burned. And in the vision, the Lord said, I have seen the blood spilled in Sidon. I have heard the cries. Speak, Son of Man, and do not be silent. So Hananiel rose and walked into the heart of Sidon, through streets crowded with idol-makers and merchants, through smoke rising from Baal's altars, until he stood before the palace gates. He called out, O Ethbaal, king of Sidon, you have lifted yourself high, but you will be brought low. You bow to gods of wood and stone, but the God of heaven sees you. Your altars will fall, your temples will burn, and your daughter will become a curse among nations. The crowd gasped. The guards seized him. But the words had already been spoken. Ethbaal came out in rage, his robes lined with gold, his crown a serpent coiled in bronze. He struck Hananiel across the face and spat. You dare speak against Baal in my city? You blaspheme in the house of Melkart? Hananiel, bleeding, replied, better to bleed for truth than reign in lies. The prophet was dragged through the streets and beaten. Some say he died that day. Others say he returned to the hills and continued preaching to a small remnant, men and women who quietly turned away from Baal, remembering the words of Hananiel. His name was never written in the royal records. But heaven remembered him. Years later, when Jezebel sat on the throne of Israel, when she hunted Elijah and painted her eyes for war, the echo of Hananiel's warning still rang true. Your daughter will become a curse among nations. And so it was. Ethbaal wasn't just a ruler, he was a servant of Baal Melkart, the god of storms, fire, and fertility. Once a priest of Astarte, he murdered his own king to seize power, blending the blade with the altar, ruling with an iron fist wrapped in priestly robes. And from this mix of royalty and religion, Jezebel was born. Her name meant, "Where is the prince?" A cry uttered during the worship of Baal, asking for the return of the storm god from the underworld. Jezebel wasn't raised like other children. While other girls played by the coast, she walked through smoke-filled temples. She learned to bow before idols, to offer incense and sacrifices. She was taught that the gods needed pleasure and punishment. She watched sacred prostitutes serve in temple rituals and saw innocent blood spilled to appease Baal's wrath. She was her father's favorite, brilliant and bold. From a young age, she outwitted her tutors and charmed foreign emissaries. And behind her eyes, those burning, calculating eyes, was a mind mold for manipulation and rule. Some say she had siblings, half-brothers from Ethbaal's many wives, temple-born daughters trained to serve in the rites of Asherah. But none matched her fire. None carried the blend of sacred duty and ruthless ambition the way she did. As a child, she learned the secrets of her people. The old spells, the seasonal festivals, the power of symbols carved into stone. And she watched her father crush dissenters beneath the weight of religion, his throne built not only on politics, but fear of the gods. The palace of Sidon was no place for silence. It echoed with music, chants, the clang of gold against marble. Servants hurried, priests paraded, and in the center of it all, a girl watched everything. Jezebel, born of fire and crowned by idolatry, the daughter of King Ethbaal, Sidon's most ruthless ruler, and Queen Amarisha, high priestess of Asherah. She was clever beyond her years. At 10, she could name every god of the Phoenician pantheon. At 12, she debated with priests twice her age. At 13, she had already begun training to lead sacred rituals. And yet, there was one day she never forgot. A day unlike the rest. She was in the upper balcony of the palace, overlooking the temple square. Below her, the people had gathered. Not for a festival. Not for a sacrifice. But for a madman, as the guards called him. A wild-eyed figure with blood on his face and fire in his voice. Hananiel. She watched, barely breathing, as he stood at the gates and shouted words that didn't match the rhythm of her city. "O Sidon, your gods are blind. You burn your children and think the heavens smile. Baal is no god. Asherah is a lie. The Lord is the one true God, and he sees your wickedness." The crowd booed. Some threw stones. But Jezebel, she leaned in closer. She didn't understand all the words. But something in his voice pierced her. It wasn't fear. It wasn't awe. It was defiance, but a kind she had never known. Then, he spoke a name. Her name. Your daughter, Jezebel. She will be a curse upon Israel. A plague upon the prophets. And her fall shall be her legacy. Jezebel's face twisted in confusion, then rage. Her hand gripped the railing. Why would a filthy man with torn robes speak of her like that? Why would he call her, the heir of Sidon, a curse? Below, her father came storming from the palace, striking the man. Guards dragged him away. Jezebel watched until the prophet disappeared into the crowd. And then she turned to her handmaid and asked, "Who was that man?" The servant hesitated. "They say, he hears from a different God. One who has no idol, no temple, only law and fire." Jezebel said nothing. But something burned in her chest that day. Not faith. Not conviction. Rebellion. She would remember that voice not as a warning, but as a challenge. She would not fear it. She would silence it. In the years to come, she would hunt every prophet who dared speak like Hananiel. But what she didn't know was that God never sends just one. Another voice was coming. A greater voice. A man who would stand alone on Mount Carmel and call down fire. After the prophet's voice faded from Sidon, Jezebel turned her ears to other voices. Voices that promised power. Voices that whispered from the shadows of temples, where the air was thick with incense. And the gods wore golden masks. She was barely 14 when she was taken into the inner sanctum of the temple of Baal Melkart. A place where no commoner could go. A place where only the chosen daughters of Sidon were trained. Not for purity, not for peace, but for dominion. They called it the Path of Flame. Here, Jezebel was no longer a princess. She was a vessel meant to be filled with the spirit of the gods. She was stripped of titles, dressed in black linen, and led through chambers of secrets. There were no windows, no laughter, only chants. Her first lesson: control the senses. She learned to sit in silence for hours, still as stone, while incense burned and visions danced before her eyes. She was taught to command fear and pleasure, to read the faces of men, to use beauty not as adornment, but as a weapon. Her second lesson: master the rituals. She memorized the blood rites of Baal, how to offer a perfect sacrifice, how to dance before the altar, how to speak in tongues of the gods during the spring festivals. She learned the dark arts of enchantment, potions, poisons, sacred oils, and symbols carved into flesh and bone. The priestesses called her Lily of Fire, because she bloomed in the heat of the altar. Her third lesson: break the will. She was brought before men of rank, ambassadors, merchants, even Sidonian nobles, to practice her power, not with swords, but with smiles. She learned how to twist a question like a dagger, how to bless with her lips and curse with her eyes. She could make a man doubt his truth, beg for her favor, or believe a lie with devotion in his heart. And all the while, her mother watched. Queen Amarisha, the high priestess of Asherah, guided Jezebel through the darker mysteries. She taught her the rites of the goddess, the rituals of fertility, seduction, domination. Together they knelt before Asherah poles, lit candles at moonrise, and sang the songs of ancient queens long forgotten. Amarisha would whisper, "You are not just a woman, Jezebel. You are the voice of the goddess. A throne with a heartbeat." Jezebel believed it. She rose quickly. By 16, she was already leading seasonal rites. By 17, she had initiated dozens of young priestesses into the order. And by 18, she stood side by side with her mother, veiled in crimson, eyes painted with fire. But she didn't forget the prophet's words. Deep in the chambers of Baal, she carved his name, Hananiel, into the altar stone. Not as a mark of fear, but as a reminder that if ever again a prophet dared challenge her, she would not watch from a balcony. She would silence him herself. By the time she reached womanhood, Jezebel wasn't just a princess. She was a weapon, trained in diplomacy, in seduction, in divine intimidation. She was ready to do what no Sidonian had done before: marry into Israel's royal family, and bring her gods with her. And then, one day, word came from the king. A proposal. The king of Israel, Ahab son of Omri, had sent envoys. He sought an alliance with Sidon. A political marriage. A daughter of Sidon would sit on Israel's throne. And without hesitation, Ethbaal said the name: Jezebel. The priestesses rejoiced. The temples prepared a grand farewell. But Jezebel said nothing. She simply looked to the horizon and whispered, "Let their God meet mine." When the Israelites heard of this union between Ahab and a Sidonian priestess, they were in shock and couldn't believe it. They thought it was impossible because Sidons were strong worshippers of Baal and pagans, and that is the opposite of Israelites. It began with rumors. Soft, like wind through dry grass. At first, no one believed it. Sidon, they whispered in the markets. A marriage between Ahab and a Sidonian priestess? No, surely not. But the messengers came, and the scrolls were sealed with the king's own mark. The alliance was real. Jezebel of Sidon, daughter of King Ethbaal, high priestess of Asherah and consort of Baal, would soon arrive in Samaria, not as a guest, but as queen. These news reached a dusty village near Shiloh. There was an old shepherd named Eliab. Eliab was sitting by the city gate when he heard the news, fingering his worn tassels, listening to the younger men talk. "They say she rides with gold and slaves," said one. "That she speaks in riddles and burns incense to demons," said another. Eliab closed his eyes and remembered his father's stories of Jericho's fall, of Deborah's song, of Gideon's fire. He remembered a time when Israel trembled before no God but the Lord. He whispered under his breath, "We were not meant to wed darkness." These marital news to a pagan also reached prophet Micaiah's hill. They did not come as a rumor but as vision. Far off, in the hill country of Ephraim, a man of God sat beneath a terebinth tree. His name was Micaiah, a quiet prophet, known for speaking little but always speaking truth. That night, he had a vision. The sky turned black. A foreign flame rose in the heart of Samaria, and a voice from heaven said, "She comes not to unite, but to divide, not to bless, but to be judged. Warn them, Micaiah, for they welcome a queen of death." The next morning, he walked barefoot to the gates of Samaria, his face pale, his eyes wild, and he cried out, "Turn your hearts back to the Lord, break down your idols. A storm is coming clothed in purple and gold. Her tongue is honey, but her soul is ash." The guards laughed. They called him mad. But the people listened. Some gathered their children and wept. Others clutched their mantles, staring toward the north, where a long royal caravan had begun to snake its way down the trade road. Chariots with Sidonian flags, dancers, priests, and at the center of it all, a veiled woman with eyes like polished onyx, Jezebel. In that moment, Israel held its breath. Some still hoped she might change, that love might soften her, that the God of Abraham would win her heart. But others knew better. This was not just a queen. This was an altar walking on 2 feet, a temple with a crown. And as the sun dipped low behind Mount Carmel, the prophets of the Lord looked to the heavens and began to prepare for war. The city of Samaria had never seen such a procession. From the highest tower to the lowest field, the people gathered, drawn by curiosity, awe, and a quiet unease. For word had spread far and wide. "She comes today. The Sidonian princess, the high priestess of Baal, Jezebel." The gates creaked open. First came the chariots, gold and purple, rimmed in bronze. Then the dancers, their faces painted, spinning to the beat of Sidonian drums. Then the priests, Baal's priests, with shaven heads and curved knives. And at last, her, seated atop a white stallion, veiled in violet, her crown woven with silver serpents. Eyes unblinking. Posture perfect. She was not smiling. The people of Israel whispered behind cloaks. Some bowed out of fear. Others turned their faces away. A child asked, "Is she a queen or a goddess?" Her mother hushed her. From the palace balcony, King Ahab watched, shoulders straight, chin high. He had been raised in the traditions of Israel. He had heard the law of Moses. He had seen the altars of the Lord. But Ahab had grown restless. The God of his fathers felt too quiet, too invisible. Jezebel, on the other hand, she glowed with power. She carried gods in her hands and fire in her eyes. And he, King of Israel, wanted her. The wedding was unlike any Israel had seen. Not held in the temple of the Lord, but in the great courtyard, newly adorned with Sidonian symbols. Baal's emblems were carved into the pillars. Asherah's dancers circled the bride with incense and petals. And in the center, Ahab and Jezebel stood, hands clasped before foreign gods. A hush fell. A Sidonian priest raised his hands and declared, By the power of Baal Melkart and the favor of Lady Asherah, may this union be sealed. May Jezebel reign as queen. May the gods bless Israel as they have blessed Sidon. A trumpet blew. The crowd cheered, some loudly, some with clenched jaws. And far away, hidden in shadow, a prophet named Obadiah watched with tears in his eyes. "We have married ruin," he whispered. As night fell, the palace roared with music and wine. Jezebel sat beside Ahab, poised but unreadable. She spoke little, but her eyes never stopped moving. She was counting the rooms, reading the faces, learning the shape of the kingdom she would now mold. And Ahab, he laughed, drank, and adored her. He thought he had married a woman, but what he brought into Israel was a throne of idols. The night Jezebel entered Samaria, the skies did not roar, the earth did not shake, but something shifted in the spirit. An ancient war had reignited, and though the people did not yet know it, the land of Israel was no longer ruled by one king. Two thrones now stood in the palace, and only one would survive. People usually ask, why did Ahab marry Jezebel, yet he was a true believer of the God of Abraham and Moses and she was a high priestess of Baal? This is because the marriage between Ahab and Jezebel wasn't just about romance, it was deeply political, spiritual, and strategic. Let's break it down from multiple angles. 1. Political alliance. Ahab married Jezebel to secure a powerful alliance between Israel and Sidon, a key city in Phoenicia. Her father, King Ethbaal, ruled over a wealthy, sea-trading empire. An alliance with Sidon meant stronger trade routes. Phoenicia was known for luxury goods, timber, and purple dye. Military support in times of war. Economic gain through shared markets and ports. Ahab was a king looking to strengthen his kingdom's influence, and Jezebel was the price. 2. Desire for power and prestige. Jezebel wasn't just any princess. She was a high priestess of Baal and Asherah, trained, educated, and steeped in influence. Marrying her gave Ahab a queen of political brilliance, a partner who could intimidate enemies and control allies, a connection to the growing Baal cult, which was popular among Canaanite and Phoenician elites. To Ahab, who had grown increasingly lukewarm toward the God of Israel, Jezebel represented something new, exotic, and powerful. 3. Spiritual compromise. Ahab was already drifting from the ways of the Lord. 1 Kings chapter 16 verse 30-31 says, Ahab son of Omri did more evil in the eyes of the Lord than any of those before him. He not only considered it trivial to commit the sins of Jeroboam, but he also married Jezebel, and began to serve Baal and worship him. This shows Ahab didn't just marry Jezebel and tolerate her religion, he adopted it. He allowed Baal worship to enter Israel because he had already begun to reject the authority of the true God. In many ways, Jezebel didn't corrupt Ahab, she simply gave him the excuse to follow what was already in his heart. Small blue diamond. 4. God's warning ignored. Israel was a nation set apart, forbidden to marry into pagan nations that worshipped false gods. See Deuteronomy 7 verses 3-4. Ahab ignored that command. He chose politics over purity, alliance over obedience, and as a result, he opened the gates to spiritual decay. So in general, the answer to the question, why did Ahab marry Jezebel, is because she brought him power, prestige, and political advantage. But in doing so, he traded Israel's divine inheritance for a woman who would lead them into apostasy, bloodshed, and judgment. But how did first Ahab heard about Jezebel and agreeing to marry her? Because he didn't know her, someone must have said a word about Jezebel or her background and what she can be of help to him and his people of Israel. This is the moment he first hears Jezebel's name whispered to him by his advisors, and something stirs in him. One day, as the kingdom always has its royal meetings, this was the first time King Ahab heard of the name Jezebel. This day they are in King Ahab's royal chamber in Samaria, twilight. The lamps are lit. His advisors sit in a circle. Ahab is listening from his ivory throne. It began not with fire, nor thunder, but a name, spoken in the hush of council chambers. My lord Ahab, we've received word from the north. From Sidon, one of his advisers said. Sidon? What of it? King Ahab replied with caution. King Ethbaal has extended the possibility of an alliance. Trade, military support, and marriage. Second advisor answered with firm and persuasive voice. Ahab's eyes narrowed, intrigued but surprised before he asked, a marriage? Yes, my king. His daughter, Jezebel. The first advisor answered. The room falls quiet. A soft breeze stirs the flame of a nearby lamp. After a minute of silence, Ahab started testing the name on his tongue, Jezebel. The second advisor glanced at all the advisors in the room for a moment before he started talking. She is, unlike most women, my king. Educated. Trained in the ways of her people. A high priestess of Baal and Asherah. Fierce. Influential. He hesitated again, then he gained the courage to speak. There are rumors that she commands more than servants, that she speaks with her gods, that men do not rule in her presence, only kneel. And is she feared? King Ahab asked, smirking. Greatly, he replied. Then she is perfect. King Ahab replied. But my king, she worships strange gods. The people of Israel will not accept her easily. The priests of the Lord, advisor one asked nervously, but before he could finish what he was saying, King Ahab cut him off with sharp and angry voice. The people will accept what I give them. And the priests will obey. And then he walks to the window, looking out over the hills of Israel. He quietly said to himself, the God of Israel has been silent too long. Perhaps it's time for a new fire. He turns back to his council. With a commanding voice. Send word to Sidon. Tell King Ethbaal. Ahab accepts the daughter of fire. And thus the seal was set. With one decision, a doorway opened. Not to peace, but to a war between thrones. During her first days as queen, Jezebel begins to unfold her true power, not with an army, but with her influence, how she moves through the palace, reshapes the royal court, disarms her enemies with beauty and fear, her rituals, and her relentless mission to transform the heart of Israel. Which then she begins to turn the people's hearts away from the Lord. Upon arriving in Israel, Jezebel wasted no time in establishing Baal worship as the dominant religion. She built a magnificent temple for Baal in Samaria, filling it with priests, idols, and altars where sacrifices were made. The people of Israel, once faithful to Yahweh, began to turn away, seduced by the promises of prosperity and fertility that Baal worship offered. But Jezebel was not content with merely promoting her gods, she sought to eradicate Yahweh worship completely. She ordered the mass execution of God's prophets, hunting them down mercilessly. Fear gripped the land, and only a few, like Elijah, dared to stand against her. She did not enter Samaria with a shout. She did not come swinging a sword. She came in perfume and silk, in whispered commands and veiled glances. And within days, the palace that had once echoed with the prayers of Yahweh, now trembled under the breath of Baal. This was the morning after the wedding. The sun rose over Samaria. Ahab lounged on his throne with a goblet in hand, his crown slightly tilted. He was drunk with victory. He had his queen, and with her, the alliance he long desired. But Jezebel was already at work. She rose early, not to pray, not to serve, but to survey. Wrapped in purple, she moved through the palace halls like a shadow. She observed the guards, counted the scribes, took note of every temple servant who still bowed toward Jerusalem. Too many priests, she murmured. Too many loyal to Yahweh. That will change. By the third day, Jezebel called for new decorations in the royal chambers. Statues of bulls and lions, symbols of Baal, were placed in the corners. Altars to Asherah were carved into the courtyard stones. She instructed Sidonian craftsmen to erect a high place just outside the palace gates. When the servants hesitated, she looked them in the eyes and said, "You will obey. I am not merely queen. I am a priestess. Disobedience to me is disobedience to the gods. And they obeyed. Some out of fear. Some out of fascination. She was unlike anything they had seen, a woman with command, with vision, with an unshakable will. Even Ahab seemed small in her presence. By the seventh day, a river of Sidonian priests had arrived, shaven heads, white robes, their chants echoing through the hills. They brought with them sacred incense burners, scrolls of Baal's teachings, images of fertility gods and sun deities. And they were not merely visitors. They were given rooms inside the palace. Some of Israel's elders protested, quietly, behind closed doors. But Jezebel heard everything. That night, 2 of them vanished. Their homes were found ransacked. Their families fled. No one spoke their names again. The winning of the people. Jezebel knew fear alone wouldn't win the nation. She needed the hearts of the people. So she began to host festivals. Golden feasts in the name of Baal. Nights of wine, dance, and prophecy. Days where the hungry were fed and the poor clothed, but only if they bowed before her altar. Mothers began naming their sons after Sidonian gods. Young men joined Baal's service, drawn by luxury and power. Even Israelite nobles began to say, "Is it not good to be united with Sidon? Are we not stronger?" Only the prophets knew what was truly happening. And they wept. One afternoon, a young Levite priest stood at the palace gate with ashes on his head. He cried out, "Israel, turn back. You have let a snake into your house. Tear down her idols before the Lord tears down our nation." Jezebel watched from the balcony. She said nothing. The guards seized the priest and dragged him away. By sunset, his voice was gone from the streets. And so it began. Within weeks, the land that once cried, "The Lord is our God," now echoed with chants to Baal and Asherah. The palace had become a sanctuary of idols. The people, divided. The prophets, hunted. But deep in the wilderness, a storm was gathering. And from the mountain of Tishbe, a man was about to rise. His name would strike fear into Jezebel's heart. Elijah. But before Elijah came, Jezebel silenced God's prophets behind palace doors. Those who declined to worship Baal gods, they were met with ruthless judgment. This is the dark heart of Jezebel's reign, where worship turns to war, and the silence of God's prophets is not peaceful, but bloody. This chapter dives deep into the hidden corridors of the palace, where Jezebel's power becomes cruel, strategic, and spiritual. She's not just silencing voices, she's declaring war on the very presence of God in the land of Samaria. There are 2 ways to kill a prophet. One is with a sword. The other is with silence. Jezebel preferred both. It began at night with the secret orders. In the inner chamber of the palace, Jezebel sat alone with her Sidonian captains, men who answered only to her. Before them lay scrolls, names, temple locations, a map of every known prophet and priest who still served Yahweh in Israel. "Do not cause a riot," she said, her voice like a blade dipped in honey. "This must be done in shadows. Quiet as wolves. Fast as fire." The captains nodded. And the next morning, the killings began. It started with the burning of the altars. The first to fall was the sanctuary near Mount Gerizim. They came before sunrise, lit the torches, seized the priests, burned the scrolls, destroyed the altar stone by stone. No one spoke. No one helped. The people watched in silence, some in fear, others in secret agreement. They had tasted Jezebel's power, and none dared challenge it. One old priest, before being dragged away, looked to the heavens and cried, "O God of Abraham, have we been forgotten?" From the balcony of the palace, Jezebel sipped Sidonian wine. "No," she whispered. "You've been replaced." Then she ordered the prophet hunt. Jezebel's spies worked like shadows. They listened to the market whispers, tracked families who still prayed at night, marked children who recited the Shema in secret. And one by one, the prophets disappeared. Some fled to caves. Some were hidden by the brave, like Obadiah, who hid 100 prophets in 2 caves, feeding them bread and water in secret. But many were never seen again. The Red Room. Inside the palace, there was a room no one entered without invitation. It smelled of incense and blood. Its walls were draped in purple, but the floor was stained with something darker. Here, Jezebel questioned captured prophets herself. "Where is your God now?" she would ask. "Why does he not strike me down?" Some wept. Some cursed her. Some stayed silent, knowing their words were now seeds for judgment. And when she was done, they were taken to the underground chambers, and never returned. The mourning of the land. With each prophet that fell, the land seemed to grieve. The skies withheld their rain. The trees bore less fruit. The air grew thick with a kind of invisible sorrow. The people noticed, but few connected it to their queen. They whispered, "Why has the blessing of the Lord faded? Why does drought cover us?" Jezebel told them it was because Baal was angry. "You must worship him fully," she said. "The drought is your punishment for divided hearts." And so the people gathered at her altars, unaware that the judgment they feared had already begun. She silenced the prophets, but she could not silence the wind, or the thunder, or the whisper that began to stir in the wilderness. For far away, in dusty robes and burning eyes, a man named Elijah was listening, and he would not be silent. Not now. Not ever. While Jezebel unleashed fear and bloodshed in public, a remnant was being preserved in secret. And at the center of that resistance stood Obadiah, a man caught between 2 masters, Jezebel in the palace, and Yahweh in his heart. Let's dive into a long, intense story, a secret look into the life of Obadiah, his covert mission, and the hidden prophets of the Lord, struggling to survive in the shadows of Jezebel's terror. Obadiah, keeper of the flame. In a palace ruled by darkness, there was one man who still carried a flame. He wore the robes of a servant, but in secret, he was a guardian of prophets. His name was Obadiah. Obadiah was the chief steward in Ahab's palace, trusted, respected, known for his loyalty. Jezebel saw him as another court official, dutiful and quiet. But what she didn't know was that Obadiah feared the Lord from his youth. Every time she ordered a prophet hunted, every time an altar was torn down, every time Ahab laughed while Baal's priests danced around fire, Obadiah's heart ached. "How long, O God?" he whispered in the privacy of his chambers. "How long will the wicked rule?" But Yahweh did not respond with fire or storm. He responded with a mission. The secret caves of mercy. Obadiah knew the land well, its caves, its crevices, its hiding places. Over time, he gathered 100 prophets, men who refused to bow to Baal, who still carried the word of the Lord. He split them, 50 in one cave, 50 in another, hidden deep in the rocky wilderness of Mount Carmel and Mount Ephraim. By day, they prayed in silence. By night, they wept and sang songs of David. Obadiah would ride out under the guise of inspection or scouting missions. In reality, his bags were filled with bread, water, and scrolls of the law. He risked his life every day. One wrong word, one curious guard, one slip of the tongue, and both he and the prophets would be dead by morning. But still he went, because the word of the Lord had to survive. One evening, as Obadiah entered one of the caves, a prophet named Haniel met him at the entrance. "They grow restless," Haniel said quietly. "Some say the Lord has forgotten us." Obadiah knelt beside him, gripping his arm. "He has not forgotten," he said. "He is waiting. There is still a remnant." He left them with loaves of barley bread and skins of water and a warning. "Double the watch tonight. Jezebel's spies have been seen nearby." Then he mounted his donkey and rode back to the palace under moonlight, his cloak heavy with dust and fear. There was an intriguing conversation inside Jezebel's war room. While Obadiah snuck food to the prophets, Jezebel convened with her Baal priests. "They hide," she said, pacing slowly, "but they are not gone. The land still groans with their prayers. I can feel it. She ordered new search patrols. Anyone caught aiding a prophet would be executed without trial. I will silence Yahweh's name from this land, she swore. Even if I must burn every cave, every scroll, every last whisper. Obadiah, listening from the hall beyond the curtain, clenched his jaw. He had to move faster. He had to be braver. The prophets were running out of time. Back in the cave, the prophets lit a small lamp and opened a worn scroll. One of them read aloud. It was the prophet's prayer. The Lord is my light and my salvation, whom shall I fear? The Lord is the stronghold of my life, of whom shall I be afraid? Psalm 27 verse 1. And in that moment, deep in the darkness of the earth, the prophets felt something stir. Not fear, but hope. Because though Jezebel ruled the palace, and Baal's priests ruled the altars, God still had his servants. And God was still listening. The prophets waited. Obadiah watched. And the heavens grew silent. But just beyond the horizon, the wind was beginning to rise. Elijah was coming. And when he came, the fire would follow. Obadiah, a man of quiet courage, suddenly stands face to face with the prophet whose return could shake the kingdom, ignite a spiritual war, and expose all the secrets Obadiah has been hiding. Let's unfold how Obadiah met Elijah. Deep wilderness, heavy silence, hearts pounding. This is the meeting that sets the storm in motion. The meeting in the dust, Obadiah and Elijah. It had been 3 years since the skies had wept. 3 years of drought, dust, and death. 3 years since the prophet Elijah had vanished into the shadows. To some, he was a myth. To Jezebel, he was a ghost she longed to kill. But to Obadiah, he was hope, walking on 2 feet. It all started with Obadiah and King Ahab on the drought walk. The land was cracked and dry, the air brittle with silence. Obadiah rode out beside King Ahab, searching for any signs of water or grass for the starving animals. Even royalty had begun to feel the curse. We'll divide the land, Ahab barked. You go one way, I'll go another. If we don't find grass, we find death. Obadiah nodded and turned his donkey toward the dusty hills, unaware that destiny was walking toward him. He had just crossed a narrow valley when a figure appeared in the path, the man in the wind, tall, cloaked in worn garments, his eyes burning like coals. Obadiah stopped, heart hammering. The man spoke, voice deep like thunder wrapped in sand. Obadiah. Obadiah froze. He knew that voice. He had heard it in stories, in dreams, and in the terrified whispers of palace guards. He dismounted slowly, eyes wide. Elijah, is it truly you? Elijah stepped forward, his face fierce, unblinking. Go. Tell your master, Ahab, that Elijah is here. Obadiah's breath caught in his throat. What? No, my lord, have you not heard? Jezebel has killed the prophets. I have risked my life hiding 100 of them in caves. If I go tell Ahab and the Lord takes you away again, he'll kill me. He'll think I lied. Elijah's gaze softened for the first time. As the Lord of hosts lives, before whom I stand, I will surely show myself to him today. Obadiah looked into Elijah's eyes, and knew. He was not just a man. He was a messenger of fire. Obadiah nodded slowly. Then may God go with us both. And he turned his donkey around, heading back toward the palace, toward a king grown cold and a queen burning with hate. The meeting in the wilderness was over. But the silence of the drought was cracking. The voice of the prophet had returned. And soon, fire would fall from the skies. The battle between Baal and Yahweh, between Jezebel's lies and Elijah's truth, was about to begin. But who is Elijah? Because his name was mentioned severally from the beginning of the story, and by just mentioning it, it brought tension to everyone, including Jezebel. Elijah wasn't just another prophet. He was a storm in a man's body, a walking judgment, a firebrand sent by the true God of heaven right into the heart of a kingdom that had sold its soul to Baal. Let's start by unpacking who Elijah really was. Then we'll jump into the explosive moment King Ahab hears his name after 3 years of drought, silence, and fear. Who was Elijah? Elijah was a Tishbite from the region of Gilead, a rugged, mountainous area east of the Jordan. He didn't come from royal blood. He didn't wear fine robes. He didn't speak smooth words. But what he did carry was the voice of God. He was a prophet of fire, literally. He called down fire from heaven more than once. A man of solitude, he lived in the wilderness, fed by ravens, hiding from Jezebel's assassins. A rebuker of kings, never afraid to point a finger in the face of power and say, "You have sinned." A vessel of judgment. When he spoke, drought came. When he prayed, rain returned. Elijah was the answer to Jezebel's cruelty and Ahab's compromise. He was the thunder after the silence. Now picture this. Ahab, king of Israel, riding back to his palace with cracked lips and dusty robes. The drought he refused to repent for had become a choking curse on the land. Then Obadiah, his faithful steward, rushes toward him. "My king, I've found someone." Ahab squints. "Who?" Obadiah looks around and lowers his voice. "Elijah." For a heartbeat, the desert wind freezes. Even the dust seems to stop midair. Ahab's eyes widen, not in fear but rage. "Elijah, the troubler of Israel, lives." He grits his teeth. Ahab had hoped Elijah was long dead. But now, after 3 years of famine, this prophet dares to return. But there's something deeper under Ahab's anger. Fear. Because if Elijah has returned, it means Yahweh is not done yet. It means judgment is near. Ahab snaps the reins. "Take me to him." And as the king rides, the sky above begins to swirl with gray. Because when Elijah meets the king, heaven will speak. This is the moment where silence breaks. The king who bowed to Baal now stands before the prophet who speaks for the God who controls rain, fire, and life itself. It's more than a confrontation, it's a spiritual standoff in broad daylight. Let's step into the heat of the scene. Dusty air. Hardened hearts. One voice rises like thunder. When fire met flesh, Elijah confronts Ahab. It had been 1,095 days since Elijah vanished. Since he stood before King Ahab and declared, "There will be no dew or rain, unless I say so." And for 1,095 days, the skies had remained shut. Crops had died. Cattle collapsed. Children cried from thirst. The gods of Jezebel had done nothing. But now, Elijah had returned. The sun was cruel above Mount Carmel as Ahab arrived on horseback, sweat trickling down his brow, cloak heavy with dust. Soldiers flanked him. Servants followed. And there, standing alone in the middle of the wasteland, was a man with wild hair, skin like leather, eyes like judgment. Elijah. The prophet didn't bow, didn't move. He waited. Ahab stopped his horse and sneered down at him. "Is that you, you troubler of Israel?" The silence between them buzzed like a hive. Elijah took one step forward, voice sharp as a blade. "I have not troubled Israel. You have. You and your father's house have forsaken the commandments of the Lord and followed the Baals." Ahab's hand tightened around his reins. "You dare speak to your king that way?" Elijah's eyes burned. "I speak to you as a servant of the living God. You wear a crown of gold, but your soul wears chains of idolatry." Elijah didn't flinch. He raised his staff. "Now gather all Israel to me at Mount Carmel. Bring the 450 prophets of Baal and the 400 prophets of Asherah who eat at Jezebel's table. We will see today who is God." Ahab's face twisted in anger, but deep inside, he feared this man who had shut the heavens with a word. He knew this was no ordinary confrontation. It was a divine summons. And so, the challenge is thrown. Before turning to leave, Elijah faced the king one last time. "You have led Israel into darkness, Ahab. You married wickedness. You invited demons into the palace. You let Jezebel slaughter God's prophets. Now the Lord will speak, not in whispers, not in secret, but in fire. Then he turned and walked into the wilderness, his figure swallowed by the heat haze. And Ahab, once Israel's ruler, now felt smaller than the dust beneath his horse's hooves. Word spread like wildfire across the land. From city to village, from street to mountaintop, the people whispered, "Elijah has returned. He speaks again. There will be a showdown." Even Jezebel, seated on her throne, clenched her goblet tighter. "Foolish man," she hissed. "Let him come. Baal will burn him alive." But something in her voice trembled. Because Elijah was not just a man. He was God's storm in human form. So, it was set. A prophet with nothing but truth. A king with everything to lose. 850 false prophets waiting to defend their gods. And a mountain where the sky would burn. The confrontation had begun. But the true battle was just ahead. Let's look at how Jezebel prepared her prophets for the showdown. While Elijah stood alone in the dust with thunder in his voice, behind the palace walls, a very different kind of preparation was taking place. Jezebel, queen of Sidon, high priestess of Baal, and the most feared woman in Israel, was not about to let her gods be shamed without a fight. She moved through her temple halls like a storm in silk, ready to turn this coming confrontation into a spectacle of power, or a last stand. While Elijah's voice echoed through the valleys. Inside Samaria's palace, the air was thick with incense and fury. Because when Jezebel heard Elijah had returned, she did not tremble. She plotted. Inside her private sanctuary, Jezebel paced. Her red and gold robes shimmered like flame. Her eyes were sharp as daggers, and her face unreadable. At her command, hundreds of prophets gathered before her, priests of Baal, priestesses of Asherah, drummers, dancers, and diviners. Some were trembling. Others were too proud to show fear. All of them knew, if they failed, Jezebel's wrath would be their final reward. "Elijah," she spat, "has crawled out of whatever rock he's been hiding under. He thinks he can shame us before the people." She raised her hand. "We will not be shamed." By torchlight, she led them into the house of Baal, the grand temple she had built stone by stone beside the palace. Statues of Baal Melkart lined the walls, carved with bull horns and open mouths. Altars of burning coals lit the chamber with flickering orange. Drums began to beat. Chants rose. Jezebel stood before them, her voice like a blade. "You are not just priests. You are the voice of Baal. The people will watch. The mountain will burn. You will dance, cry, bleed if you must. But you will call down fire." She paced between them, touching shoulders, whispering blessings in the old Sidonian tongue. Some believed her. Some feared her more than the silence of the heavens. Later that night, in her private chamber, Jezebel knelt before her own altar. Alone. She whispered in the darkness, "Baal, my father, my fire, answer me." But the flame on the altar flickered once, then went still. She clenched her fists. She would not lose. Before sending the prophets to Mount Carmel, she gave one final command. "If you fail me, if you let this prophet humiliate us, then I swear by the gods of Sidon, you will not return alive." The priests bowed low, the room thick with fear and smoke. She waved her hand. "Go." And they did, 850 strong, cloaked in red and gold, masks painted on their faces, chanting, drumming, calling to gods who had not spoken in years. While Elijah prepared an altar of stones, Jezebel prepared a parade of gods. While Elijah prayed alone, Jezebel armed herself with ritual, fury, and fear. And while Israel stood between two opinions, heaven held its breath, because the gods of Jezebel were walking into a trap, and only one fire would fall. Now we're diving into the heart of the storm, a sacred contrast that tells the whole story. On one side, Elijah, alone, still, humble, preparing an altar of stone and prayer, trusting only the living God. On the other, Baal's prophets, 850 strong, drenched in sweat and blood, shouting to a sky that refuses to answer. This is not just a contest, it's a picture of two kingdoms. One of noise and chaos, the other of truth and fire. Let's split the scene. Two worlds. One mountain. One God. This is the silence and frenzy, the duel of the altars. The sun rose high over Mount Carmel, beating down on rocks, dust, and thousands of curious Israelites gathered to watch. Word had spread like fire. Today, we will see whose God is real. The mountain became an arena. The people, witnesses. The prophets, performers. And the sky, the silent judge. Side 1. The prophets of Baal begin. Drums pounded. Trumpets blasted. Baal's prophets circled their altar like a golden sea, chanting, spinning, shouting. Their altar was tall, soaked in oil, surrounded by dancers. They piled wood upon it, laid their bull upon the flames, and raised their arms to the heavens. "O Baal, answer us," they cried. "Baal, hear us. Send the fire." They danced faster, louder, leaping, stomping, singing ancient songs from Sidon. Jezebel's training was on full display. But the sky stayed blue. Still. Silent. Side 2. Elijah builds in silence. Not far off, Elijah knelt beside 12 stones, one for each tribe of Israel, now torn by idolatry. He didn't shout. He didn't drum. He built slowly, reverently, as if reminding the people of who they once were, God's chosen. He dug a trench around the altar, placed the wood, laid the bull. Then, with a quiet voice, he called out, "Fill 4 jars with water, and pour it on the sacrifice." They did. Again, he said. They poured more. A third time. Water soaked everything: altar, wood, trench. So much water, the ground became a shallow pool. Elijah looked at it all and nodded. No tricks. No fire. Just faith. Side 1. Baal's prophets lose control. The hours passed. The prophets screamed louder. The drummers beat faster. They began to cut themselves with swords and spears, blood pouring down their arms and legs. "Answer us, Baal." Still, nothing. No fire. No whisper. Not even wind. Elijah, watching from a distance, couldn't help himself. He stepped forward, voice calm and cutting. "Shout louder." Maybe he's asleep. Or deep in thought. Or relieving himself. The people laughed nervously. The prophets shrieked. But Baal did not speak. Because Baal was not real. Side 2. Elijah steps forward. Now it was his turn. The frenzy faded. The mountain grew still. Even the wind seemed to stop. Elijah stood before the altar, soaked and surrounded by silence. He lifted his hands and prayed, not for show, not for drama. Just 12 simple lines. "Lord, God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, let it be known today that you are God in Israel. And I am your servant. Answer me, Lord, so these people will know that you are turning their hearts back again." The people leaned in. The prophets held their breath. And then, boom, fire falls from heaven. The sky split open. A roar like thunder and flame tore through the heavens. Fire fell not like a candle, but like a flood. It consumed the sacrifice, the wood, the stones, the water, even the dust. The mountain trembled. The people fell to their faces. And from their mouths came one cry, "The Lord, He is God. The Lord, He is God." And the prophets of Baal? They were exposed. Exhausted. Powerless. 2 altars. 2 kingdoms. One soaked in blood and noise. The other in faith and water. Only one burned with holy fire. And all of Israel finally remembered who their God truly was. Are you ready for the aftershock? Because Mount Carmel may have burned with fire, but what came after was blood, fear, and fury. Elijah had proven the power of the one true God before the eyes of a trembling nation. But the war wasn't over. No, now Jezebel would strike. And the land would once again hold its breath. The fire had fallen. The false altar lay in ashes. And the people of Israel fell on their faces, chanting, "The Lord, He is God. The Lord, He is God." But the story didn't end with fire. It ended with a sword. Elijah turned to the crowd, his face still glowing with the light of heaven. His voice was no longer just prophetic, it was commanding. "Seize the prophets of Baal. Let not one of them escape." And the people moved like a tide. The once revered priests who shouted, danced, and bled for a silent God now ran in panic, robes tangled, masks cracked, screams lost in the wind. They were dragged down from the mountain to the Kishon Valley, the place of reckoning. There, by Elijah's word, every last one of them was struck down. 850 prophets. False voices silenced. The land cleansed by blood. It was justice, swift and terrifying. But somewhere, a storm was already building. King Ahab rode back to Jezreel. The dust clung to him. His hands trembled on the reins. Behind him, the mountain still smoked. And beside him rode the fear of what came next. He entered the palace, stepped into the marble halls, and Jezebel was waiting. Her eyes met his. Cold. Demanding. "Well," she asked. "What did Baal say?" Ahab looked down. "Elijah, he called down fire. From heaven. The people turned on the prophets. He killed them. All of them." Silence. Then a whisper escaped her lips, more deadly than any scream. "He did what?" The goblet in her hand shattered on the floor. "He kills my priests. He embarrasses my gods. And you just tell me?" She stood, her face pale but her spirit flaming. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. Furious, Jezebel swore vengeance against Elijah, forcing him to flee. But her power was beginning to crumble. She sent a message. As night fell, a servant found Elijah resting in a cave, eyes heavy from battle and prayer. But the moment he opened the scroll, sleep vanished. "May the gods deal with me, be it ever so severely, if by this time tomorrow, I do not make your life like one of them." Jezebel, Queen of Israel. It wasn't just a threat. It was a death sentence. Jezebel had not been defeated on the mountain. She had been awakened. The man who faced down kings and gods now ran through the wilderness, broken, weary, alone. He fled south. Into the desert. Into the silence. "It is enough," he cried. "Let me die." But even in the shadow of fear, God was not done with Elijah. He would feed him. Speak to him. Strengthen him. Because the true battle was still coming, not just against Jezebel's fury, but against the idolatry and fear that poisoned the heart of a nation. Jezebel thought the fire would break Elijah. She didn't realize, it had only refined him. Now, the queen would face something no prophet, no priest, no sword could stop. The judgment of God himself. Jezebel was not only cruel in religion but also in politics. And now we truly see the depth of Jezebel's darkness. Because after Elijah vanished into the wilderness, after the fire, the sword, and the judgment, Jezebel did not repent. She dug deeper. The queen who had defied heaven's fire became something even worse. A shadow behind the throne, twisting laws, silencing truth, and ruling with blood-stained hands. With Elijah gone, a storm passed. But in its place, a fog rolled in, thick, poisonous, quiet. Jezebel wiped the blood of her priests from her throne, put on her crown again, and turned her eyes not just toward the altar, but to the law, the land, the people. If she couldn't destroy Israel's faith with fire, she would choke it through policy. King Ahab returned to his court, shaken. But Jezebel, she was emboldened. She called her scribes. She summoned governors. She appointed her own priests, her own judges, her own spies. "Let the people chant for Yahweh," she hissed. "But let the kingdom answer to me." Ahab sat the throne, but Jezebel held the strings. Laws changed. Land was seized. Truth-tellers vanished in the night. And slowly, a holy nation became a haunted kingdom. It began with a vineyard, a small piece of land. A man named Naboth. He owned a vineyard beside the palace, an inheritance passed down from his fathers. Ahab wanted it. Naboth refused. "The Lord forbid that I should give you the inheritance of my ancestors." Ahab sulked like a child. But Jezebel, she smiled. "Do you now govern Israel? I'll get you the vineyard." She forged letters in Ahab's name, sealed them with the royal seal, and sent them to the elders of the city. "Proclaim a fast. Accuse Naboth of cursing God and the king. Then take him outside the city, and stone him." They obeyed. And Naboth's blood soaked the earth while Jezebel sipped wine from the palace balcony. "Go," she said to Ahab. "Take your vineyard. It's yours now." A man died. Not for rebellion. Not for treason. But because Jezebel desired his soil. Whispers filled the streets. "Did you hear what happened to Naboth? Who will be next? Even the righteous aren't safe anymore." Prophets went into hiding. The poor grew silent. The people feared Jezebel more than they feared God. She had built temples, trained false prophets, rewritten laws, and taught Israel how to sin without guilt. And for a time, it worked. She ruled with beauty and a blade. She smiled with lips of honey and a tongue of poison. She made herself queen of the land, but forgot the land belonged to God. And the blood she spilled would cry out from the soil. Because heaven does not forget. Not Naboth. Not the prophets. Not the fire. And though the throne seemed untouchable, a reckoning was coming. Years have passed since fire fell on Mount Carmel. Jezebel rules from her palace, smug and untouched, dripping in luxury and blood. She thinks the prophet Elijah is forgotten, a ghost swallowed by the wilderness. But the God she mocked has not been silent. And Elijah, the man of fire, returns with a word that will shake the palace walls and haunt Jezebel's name for all time. It was quiet the morning Elijah returned. No fire. No storm. No earthquake. Just a prophet with dust on his sandals. And judgment on his tongue. The Lord spoke to Elijah. "Go down to meet Ahab, king of Israel, who rules in Samaria. He is now in Naboth's vineyard, where he has gone to take possession." Elijah, weathered by time, rose once again not as a warrior, but as a witness. He made his way to Jezreel, where vines still grew over Naboth's grave. There stood Ahab, inspecting the land he stole. Elijah stepped into the vineyard like a shadow. The king turned and froze. "So, you have found me, my enemy." Elijah's eyes burned like coals. "I have found you," he replied, "because you have sold yourself to do what is evil in the eyes of the Lord." Elijah's voice thundered over the fields. "This is what the Lord says. I am going to bring disaster on you. I will wipe out your descendants. I will cut off every last male in Israel, slave or free. I will make your house like the house of Jeroboam." And concerning Jezebel, Elijah's voice grew low, chilling. "Dogs will devour Jezebel by the wall of Jezreel. Anyone belonging to Ahab who dies in the city will be eaten by dogs. Those who die in the country will be eaten by birds." The wind howled through the vines, as if the land itself remembered the blood. For the first time in years, Ahab's pride cracked. He tore his royal robes. He put on sackcloth. He fasted. Though wicked, Ahab knew fear when he heard the voice of God. And so God, in his mercy, delayed the full destruction, but not for Jezebel. "Because he humbled himself before me," the Lord told Elijah, "I will not bring this disaster in his day, but I will bring it on his house in the days of his son." Elijah left the vineyard. The sky darkened behind him. The word of the Lord echoed from vine to vine. But in the palace, Jezebel laughed. "Dogs will eat me," she scoffed. "Let the dogs try." She painted her eyes, sipped her wine, and went on plotting. She had no fear of the prophet's words. No trembling. No repentance. Only pride. But every step she took after that, Every law she signed, every mocking smile she gave, was one step closer to the wall of Jezreel, where the hounds of justice were already sharpening their teeth. Elijah had spoken. God had decreed. The queen who silenced prophets would now be hunted by prophecy. Her crown was still gold, her throne still high, but her fall, it had already begun. And now we turn the page, from the prophets in sackcloth, to the soldier soaked in oil, chosen by heaven to swing the sword of justice. The story shifts. The throne still stands, Jezebel still rules, but deep in the heart of Israel's army, God is stirring up a storm in human flesh. A furious commander named Jehu. He didn't look like a prophet. He didn't sound like a priest. But when the time came, he rode like judgment itself. The rise of Jehu, the wild warrior of judgment. In the shadows of Jezebel's kingdom, God began crafting a weapon. Not from the temple, not from the schools of the prophets, but from the battlefield. Jehu was the son of Nimshi, a hardened warrior, a trusted chariot captain in the army of Israel, a man of war, sharp-eyed, fast to anger, fearless to fight. He wasn't pious, he wasn't polished, but he had one quality that heaven needed: obedience to the word of God even if it meant blood. And God was watching. Years after Elijah's prophecy, God spoke to Elisha, his successor. Take a flask of oil and go to Ramoth-Gilead. Find Jehu son of Nimshi. Take him to an inner room and anoint him king over Israel. A young prophet obeyed. He rode in secret to the battlefield at Ramoth, where Jehu and his fellow commanders rested in their tents. The young prophet pulled Jehu aside. Jehu raised an eyebrow. What is it? Some kind of private message? Come with me, the prophet said. I have a word from the Lord. They stepped into the tent. The flap closed behind them. Inside, the prophet took out a small flask of oil. Without warning, he poured it over Jehu's head. Oil dripped into his beard, onto his armor. This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. I anoint you king over the people of the Lord, over Israel. You are to destroy the house of Ahab your master. I will avenge the blood of my servants the prophets, and the blood of all the Lord's servants shed by Jezebel. The young prophet stepped back, eyes blazing. The whole house of Ahab will perish. Dogs will devour Jezebel on the plot of ground at Jezreel, and no one will bury her. And just like that, he turned and ran. Jehu stood stunned, the oil still dripping. He wiped his face. He straightened. And something snapped into place inside him. Jehu stepped out of the tent. His fellow officers looked up. They saw the oil. They saw his eyes. Is everything all right? They asked. Jehu looked at them, voice steady, sharp as steel. You want to know? The man poured oil on my head and said, This is what the Lord says, I anoint you king over Israel. A moment of silence. Then the camp exploded. The men pulled off their cloaks, laid them at Jehu's feet, and blew the trumpet. Jehu is king, no ceremony, no golden crown, just a warrior, a trumpet blast, and a kingdom about to burn. The prophecy was in motion. Elijah had spoken. Jehu had been anointed. And Jezebel's days were now numbered. The queen didn't know it yet. But her throne was cracking. Her blood was calling. And the dogs of Jezreel were already howling in the distance. The time for whispers has passed. The days of prophecy are colliding with the hour of vengeance. Jehu is no longer a commander. He's a storm in motion. A wheel of fire. A chariot crashing through time and kingdoms to fulfill one word from heaven. The dogs of Jezreel are about to feast. This is the ride of justice. Jehu thunders to Jezreel. From Ramoth-Gilead to Jezreel was no short journey. But Jehu didn't ride like a man on a road. He rode like a sword hurled from heaven. Jehu lashed the reins. His chariot surged forward like thunder breaking loose. Behind him, dust curled into the sky. Wheels screamed. Horses foamed. Soldiers tried to keep pace, but Jehu drove like a madman. The very road trembled under him. Back in Jezreel, a watchman stood atop the tower, eyes scanning the horizon. He squinted, pointed. "I see a company of men coming." King Joram, Ahab's son, stepped to the balcony. So did Ahaziah, king of Judah. Both were in the city, unaware that the sword of prophecy was galloping straight at them. Joram ordered, "Send a horseman. Ask if he comes in peace." A soldier rode out to meet the chariot. "Do you come in peace, Jehu?" Jehu growled back, without stopping. "What do you know of peace?" "Fall in behind me." The soldier turned, confused, then obeyed. Another rider went. Same question. Same thunderous reply. "What do you know of peace?" The watchman shouted again from the wall. "He's driving like a madman, it must be Jehu son of Nimshi." Joram paled. He and Ahaziah mounted their chariots and rushed out to meet him. Straight into the teeth of judgment. They met in the very vineyard that had once belonged to Naboth. The blood-soaked ground where Elijah had spoken the first curse. "Is it peace, Jehu?" Joram asked. Jehu pulled the reins, eyes blazing. "How can there be peace? As long as the harlotries and witchcrafts of your mother Jezebel abound." And before Joram could react, Jehu raised his bow, drew the string, and loosed an arrow straight through the king's heart. The king slumped in his chariot. His blood spilled across Naboth's vineyard. Jehu turned to his officer. "Throw him on the field, the Lord cursed. Let his blood soak the soil he stole." Ahaziah turned to flee, panic rising. Jehu's men chased him down. The arrows flew again. The king of Judah fell near Ibleam, dying in his chariot. 2 kings down. In one ride. One prophecy closer to Jezebel. Far above, in the palace of Jezreel, Jezebel heard the chariot wheels echoing off the stone. She stood at her window, painted her eyes, arranged her royal hair, looked out like a queen unbothered. "Have you come in peace, Zimri, you murderer of your master?" she sneered. But there was no peace left. Only the howl of dogs, and a crown beginning to tilt. Jehu had arrived. The wild ride was over. Justice had reached the gates. And Jezebel, for the first time in her life, had no power to stop it. Oh, now we reach the final breath of a name soaked in blood and blasphemy. The last moment of the queen who painted her eyes with pride, who whispered death to prophets behind palace walls, who mocked heaven from her throne. But prophecy is patient. And justice, though slow, rides with purpose. Now Jezebel stands in her palace, alone, painted, proud, and the dogs of Jezreel are waiting. The death of Jezebel, the queen and the window. The sun hung low over Jezreel, casting long shadows on the palace. Inside, Jezebel stood in front of a bronze mirror, steady hands painting her eyes with black coal. She fixed her crown, lifted her chin. No tears, no panic, only pride. "I am Jezebel," she whispered, "daughter of kings, high priestess of Baal." Outside, Jehu's chariot thundered into the courtyard. Jezebel stepped to the highest window of the palace. Beneath her, soldiers gathered. Jehu dismounted, eyes cold. She looked down upon him like a queen addressing a dog. "Is it peace, Zimri, murderer of your master?" Jehu didn't flinch. He didn't respond with words. He looked up at the window and raised his voice. "Who is on my side? Who?" Silence. Then, 2, 3 eunuchs stepped beside the queen. The very servants who once bowed to her now stared at her coldly. Jehu pointed up. "Throw her down." The eunuchs didn't hesitate. They seized her royal robes, crown and all, and hurled her from the window. Time seemed to freeze. Her body twisted in the air. Her crown glinted once in the sun. Then, splat. She hit the ground. Blood sprayed the palace walls. Her bones cracked beneath the hooves of Jehu's horses as he walked away. The woman who once silenced prophets was now a stain in the dust. Jehu went inside. He sat, ate, drank, and then, as if remembering an old line from a prophecy, he spoke, "Take care of that cursed woman, and bury her. For she was a king's daughter." His men went out to obey. But when they came to where she had fallen, there was nothing left. Only her skull, her feet, and the palms of her hands. The dogs had come, just as Elijah had spoken years ago. In the field of Jezreel, the dogs will devour Jezebel. Her body will be like dung on the ground, so that no one can say, "This is Jezebel." And that was the end. The queen who ruled by fear, who painted her face and poisoned a kingdom, now nameless in the dust. Her throne broken, her legacy devoured. Jezebel was no more. The name that echoes Jezebel's legacy. And so, the story ends not with a crown, but with dust. Not with worship songs, but with silence and dogs in the street. Jezebel, daughter of Sidon, priestess of Baal, queen of Israel, had everything. Power, wealth, a king's heart, a nation's fear. But she raised her hand against heaven, and heaven raised up a man named Elijah, then a warrior named Jehu. And when those two names collided with hers, only one remained. In the generations that followed, the name Jezebel was no longer spoken with honor. It became a whisper in the dark, a caution to queens, to priestesses, to nations. Don't walk the path of Jezebel. Don't wear the crown of rebellion. Don't paint your face when your heart is rotten. Even in the final book of the Bible, Revelation, God warns a church. You tolerate that woman Jezebel, who calls herself a prophetess. I have given her time to repent, but she is unwilling. Centuries later, and still, her story was not forgotten. Jezebel had beauty, but no repentance. She had authority, but no fear of God. She had time, but no turning. And so, her name fell into the dust. A broken crown, a blooded window, a name that no mother dares to give her daughter. Because when you fight against the voice of heaven, you might stand for a while, but you will always fall. The children of Jezebel and King Ahab, born of royalty, raised in rebellion. While Jezebel stirred altars and silenced prophets. While fire fell from heaven and rain returned by Elijah's prayer. Something else was happening behind the palace gates. Jezebel was raising heirs. Children of a queen. Children of a cursed throne. It began not long after Jezebel married Ahab. Their union wasn't just political, it was a legacy in motion. In the grand chambers of the palace in Samaria, Jezebel gave birth to her firstborn son, Ahaziah. The court rejoiced. Foreign diplomats sent gifts. Sidon's priests whispered blessings of Baal over him. But there was no offering to the God of Israel. No dedication. No prayers of thanksgiving. This child belonged to Jezebel's gods. And she would make sure of it. The children of Jezebel. 1. Ahaziah, her eldest son. 2. Jehoram, or Joram, her second son. 3. Athaliah, her daughter. Each of them grew up surrounded by idols. Baal and Asherah poles towered over the gardens. Priests of Baal dined in the palace halls. The name of the Lord was barely whispered inside those marble rooms. The poison of their upbringing. Jezebel didn't raise children the way a Hebrew mother would. There was no Torah on their lips. No stories of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Instead, they learned how to manipulate royal courts, how to crush opposition, how to wear crowns like weapons. Ahaziah, her eldest, followed his father Ahab into idolatry. By the time he became king, he had fully absorbed Jezebel's poison. Jehoram, his younger brother, was no better. He ruled after Ahaziah's death and did evil in the sight of the Lord. Not because he was lost, but because he was trained that way. And then there was Athaliah, the most dangerous of all. Athaliah, Jezebel's darkest reflection. Athaliah married into the royal family of Judah, the southern kingdom. It was supposed to unite Israel and Judah. But instead, she brought her mother's darkness with her. She introduced Baal worship into the temple courts of Jerusalem. She whispered in ears. She watched kings fall. And when her son died, she seized the throne herself. Athaliah ruled Judah with the same cold grip as her mother. She even murdered her own grandchildren to keep power. Jezebel had raised a queen of death. But just as Jezebel's children were born into royalty, they were also born into a prophecy. Elijah had warned Ahab, "Your sons will be cut off. Not one of your male descendants will survive." And one by one, that prophecy came true. Jehu, the wild warrior God raised up, executed Ahaziah, slaughtered Joram, and wiped out Ahab's entire house. When Jehu rode through Israel like a storm, Jezebel's children raised in rebellion were washed away in wrath. They had power. They had lineage. They had crowns. But they were trained in treason against heaven. And in the end, the children of Jezebel fell not just because of their enemies, but because of the foundation laid beneath them. No truth. No fear of God. Only ambition. And a curse that ran through royal blood. On Tell My Tales, we don't just speak of kings and queens, we uncover the roots beneath the throne. The story of Jezebel's children isn't just about them. It's a warning for anyone raising the next generation. Because what we whisper behind palace doors may one day shape a nation's fate. Thank you for listening to this gripping tale on Tell My Tales. A warning wrapped in a crown. A queen and her entire family remembered not for their power, but for how they fell. Don't forget to like, comment, and share this story if it stirred something deep. And subscribe for more ancient tales with timeless truths. Until next time, tell the truth. Tell it boldly. Tell my tales.